Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. It's okay to have your eggs in one basket as long as you control what happens to that basket. The idea of lying on a beach as my main thing just sounds like the worst. It sounds horrible to me. I would go bonkers. I would have to be on serious drugs. I'd be super duper bored. I like high intensity. I think it's very important to have a feedback loop where you're constantly thinking about what you've done and how you could be doing it better. I would like to die on Mars, just not on impact. Brand is just a perception, and perception will match reality over time. Sometimes it will be ahead, other times it will be behind. But brand is simply a collective impression some have about a product. When I was a little kid, I was really scared of the dark, but then I came to understand, dark just means the absence of photons in the visible wavelength, 400 to 700 nanometers. Then I thought, well, it's really silly to be afraid of a lack of photons. Then I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore after that. There's a tremendous bias against taking risks. Everyone is trying to optimize their ass covering. I'm not trying to be anyone's savior. I just try to think about the future and not be sad. I really like computer games, but then if I made really great computer games, how much effect would that have on the world? If you buy a ticket to hell, it isn't fair to blame hell. I think we have a duty to maintain the light of consciousness to make sure it continues into the future. If you're not concerned about AI safety, you should be. Vastly more risk than North Korea. If humanity is to become multiplanetary, the fundamental breakthrough that needs to occur in rocketry is a rapidly and completely reusable rocket. Achieving it would be on a par with what the Wright brothers did. It's the fundamental thing that's necessary for humanity to become a spacefaring civilization. America would never have been colonized if ships weren't reusable. America is the spirit of human exploration distilled. Life needs to be more than just solving problems every day. You need to wake up and be excited about the future. I was raised by books, and then my parents. If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds aren't in your favor. I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary. When I was a child, there's one thing I said: I never want to be alone. That's what I would say. If something is important enough, you should try even if the probable outcome is failure. I think that if people are concerned about volatility, they should definitely not buy our stock. I'm not here to convince you to buy stock. Do not buy it if volatility is scary. There you go. When something is important enough, you should try even if the probable outcome is failure. Buy and hold stock in companies where you love the product roadmap, sell where you don't. Pronouns suck. There have to be reasons that you get up in the morning and you want to live. Why do you want to live? What's the point? What inspires you? What do you love about the future? The only thing that makes sense to do is strive for greater collective enlightenment. I think that's the single best piece of advice. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better and questioning yourself. Excessive use of made-up acronyms is a significant impediment to communication. No one can actually remember all these acronyms, and people don't want to seem dumb in a meeting, so they just sit there in ignorance. This is particularly tough on new employees. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. My proceeds from the PayPal acquisition were $180 million. I put $100 million in SpaceX, $70 million in Tesla, and $10 million in Solar City. I had to borrow money for rent. You should take the approach that you're wrong. Your goal is to be less wrong. You get paid in direct proportion to the difficulty of problems you solve. I think it's very important to have a feedback loop where you're constantly thinking about what you've done and how you could be doing it better. I think it's important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. The normal way we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We are doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it is like what other people are doing. You boil things down to the most fundamental truths and then reason up from there. Constantly seek criticism. A well thought out critique of whatever you're doing is as valuable as gold. It is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary. No, I don't ever give up. I'd have to be dead or completely incapacitated. I'm not trying to be anyone's savior. I'm just trying to think about the future and not be sad. If you need inspiration, don't do it. The first step is to establish that something is possible, then probability will occur. I came to the conclusion that we should aspire to increase the scope and scale of human consciousness in order to better understand what questions to ask. Really, the only thing that makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. In terms of the internet, it's like humanity acquiring a collective nervous system, whereas previously we were more like a question, like a collection of cells that communicated by diffusion. With the advent of the internet, it was suddenly like we got a nervous system. It's a hugely impactful thing. Any product that needs a manual to work is broken. I take the position that I'm always to some degree wrong, and the aspiration is to be less wrong. There needs to be an intersection of the set of people who wish to go and the set of people who can afford to go, and that intersection of sets has to be enough to establish a self-sustaining civilization. My rough guess is that for $500,000, there are enough people that could afford to go and would want to go, but it's not going to be a vacation jaunt. It's going to be saving up all your money and selling all your stuff, like when people moved to the early American colonies. Even at 1 million people, you're assuming an incredible amount of productivity per person, because you would need to recreate the entire industrial base on Mars. You would need to mine and refine all of these different materials in a much more difficult environment than Earth. There would be no trees growing. There would be no oxygen or nitrogen that are just there. No oil. Excluding organic growth, if you could take 100 people at a time, you would need 10,000 trips to get to 1 million people. But you would also need a lot of cargo to support those people. In fact, your cargo to person ratio is going to be quite high. It would probably be 10 cargo trips for every human trip, so more like 100,000 trips. And we're talking 100,000 trips of a giant spaceship. If we can establish a Mars colony, we can almost certainly colonize the whole solar system, because we'll have created a strong economic forcing function for the improvement of space travel. We'll go to the moons of Jupiter, at least some of the outer ones for sure, and probably Titan on Saturn, and the asteroids. Once we have that forcing function and an Earth to Mars economy, we'll cover the whole solar system. But the key is that we have to make the Mars thing work. If we're going to have any chance of sending stuff to other star systems, we need to be laser focused on becoming a multi-planet civilization. That's the next step. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better. You need to live in a dome initially, but over time you could terraform Mars to look like Earth and eventually walk around outside without anything on, so it's a fixer-upper of a planet. I could go and buy one of the islands in the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom, but I am much more interested in trying to build and create a new company. They were building a Ferrari for every launch when it was possible that a Honda Accord might do the trick. One of the biggest mistakes we made was trying to automate things that are super easy for a person to do, but super hard for a robot to do. It's pretty hard to get to another star system. Alpha Centauri is 4 light-years away, so if you go at 10% of the speed of light, it's going to take you 40 years, and that's assuming you can instantly reach that speed, which isn't going to be the case. You have to accelerate. You have to build up to 20 or 30% and then slow down, assuming you want to stay at Alpha Centauri and not go zipping past. It's just hard. With current lifespans, you need generational ships. You need antimatter drives, because that's the most mass efficient. It's doable, but it's super slow. One of the really tough things is figuring out what questions to ask. Once you figure out the question, then the answer is relatively easy. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. The path to the CEO's office should not be through the CFO's office, and it should not be through the marketing department. It needs to be through engineering and design. I don't think it's a good idea to plan to sell a company. It is a mistake to hire huge numbers of people to get a complicated job done. Numbers will never compensate for talent in getting the right answer, will tend to slow down progress, and will make the task incredibly expensive. A company is a group organized to create a product or service, and it is only as good as its people and how excited they are about creating. I do want to recognize a ton of super talented people. I just happen to be the face of the companies. People work better when they know what the goal is and why. It is important that people look forward to coming to work in the morning and enjoy working. If you're co-founder or CEO, you have to do all kinds of tasks you might not want to do. If you don't do your chores, the company won't succeed. No task is too menial. I say something, and then it usually happens. Maybe not on schedule, but it usually happens. I do think there is a lot of potential if you have a compelling product and people are willing to pay a premium for that. I think that is what Apple has shown. You can buy a much cheaper cell phone or laptop, but Apple's product is so much better than the alternative, and people are willing to pay that premium. I don't spend my time pontificating about high-concept things. I spend my time solving engineering and manufacturing problems. I always invest my own money in the companies that I create. I don't believe in the whole thing of just using other people's money. I don't think that's right. I'm not going to ask other people to invest in something if I'm not prepared to do so myself. My biggest mistake is probably weighing too much on someone's talent and not someone's personality. I think it matters whether someone has a good heart. I don't create companies for the sake of creating companies, but to get things done. I don't believe in process. In fact, when I interview a potential employee and he or she says that it's all about the process, I see that as a bad sign. The problem is that at a lot of big companies, process becomes a substitute for thinking. You're encouraged to behave like a little gear in a complex machine. Frankly, it allows you to keep people who aren't that smart, who aren't that creative. Starting and growing a business is as much about the innovation, drive, and determination of the people behind it as the product they sell. The first step is to establish that something is possible, then probability will occur. There are really two things that have to occur in order for a new technology to be affordable to the mass market. One is you need economies of scale. The other is you need to iterate on the design. You need to go through a few versions. Talent is extremely important. It's like a sports team. The team that has the best individual player will often win, but then there's a multiplier from how those players work together and the strategy they employ. Work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in 80 to 100-hour weeks every week. This improves the odds of success. If other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you know that you will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve. I've actually not read any books on time management. I'm interested in things that change the world or that affect the future, and wondrous new technology where you see it and you're like, wow, how did that even happen? How is that possible? Really pay attention to negative feedback and solicit it, particularly from friends. Hardly anyone does that, and it's incredibly helpful. If you get up in the morning and think the future is going to be better, it is a bright day. Otherwise, it's not. What makes innovative thinking happen? I think it's really a mindset. You have to decide. People should pursue what they are passionate about. That will make them happier than pretty much anything else. Being an entrepreneur is like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. I wouldn't say I have a lack of fear. In fact, I'd like my fear emotion to be less because it's very distracting and fries my nervous system. If you're trying to create a company, it's like baking a cake. You have to have all the ingredients in the right proportion. I think most of the important stuff on the internet has been built. There will be continued innovation, for sure, but the great problems of the internet have essentially been solved. I think we have a duty to maintain the light of consciousness to make sure it continues into the future. When Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, "Nah, what's wrong with a horse?" That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. When somebody has a breakthrough innovation, it is rarely one little thing. Very rarely is it one little thing. It's usually a whole bunch of things that collectively amount to a huge innovation. You shouldn't do things differently just because they are different. They need to be better. You have to say, well, why did it succeed where others did not? I would just question things. It would infuriate my parents that I wouldn't just believe them when they said something, cause I'd ask them why, and then I'd consider whether that response made sense given everything else I knew. It's very important to like the people you work with, otherwise life and your job is gonna be quite miserable. We have a strict no assholes policy at SpaceX. I think the best way to attract venture capital is to try and come up with a demonstration of whatever product or service it is, and ideally take that as far as you can. Just see if you can sell that to real customers and start generating some momentum. The further along you can get with that, the more likely you are to get funding. Disruptive technology, where you really have a big technology discontinuity, tends to come from new companies. As much as possible, avoid hiring MBAs. MBA programs don't teach people how to create companies. Don't delude yourself into thinking something's working when it's not, or you're gonna get fixated on a bad solution. If something has to be designed and invented, and you have to figure out how to ensure that the value of the thing you create is greater than the cost of the inputs, then that is probably my core skill. I always have optimism, but I'm realistic. It was not with the expectation of great success that I started Tesla or SpaceX. It's just that I thought they were important enough to do anyway. Don't confuse schooling with education. I didn't go to Harvard, but the people that work for me did. You want to have a future where you're expecting things to be better, not one where you're expecting things to be worse. Great companies are built on great products. Good ideas are always crazy until they are not. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better. Keep questioning yourself.